see if I can balance my notes. Okay, this is going to be the combination of tech and physical, hey. All right, so, hi, I'm Kim McGuire. I definitely don't know a lot of you. I've definitely been out of the loop in Sydney for a while. Looks like there's a lot of people who are quite interested in IxDA, everything, which is fantastic. Of course, yeah, so this is not the, yeah, right, okay, cool. Sorry, dual mics. So yes, just repeating, I'm Kim McGuire. I am a user experience designer and service designer. I'm currently working with Qantas. There's a few Qantases in the room. Hey, that's right. There they are. And I just wanted to reiterate to Joe's point about that mentoring program. I've had some brilliant mentors in the past, one of who probably doesn't know it, but he's actually in the room. Ben Perkatich. Hey. It's a really valuable thing to have a good mentor on your side, and something like this I think would be a supremely valuable program if you guys do get involved. So highly recommend. But without further ado, let's get digital. This is a potentially quite contentious topic. How many people in the room are working within a digital team, a digital department, or a digital project? Yeah? How do you feel about the fact that digital may or may not actually exist? Okay, need some proof. All right, right. Well, this is what this is all about. So we'll get stuck in. Let's get digital. So first things first, we're going to sort of take a big step back and look at the universe according to science. So firstly, yes, these are my dodgy sketch notes. So please, if you're a visual designer in the room, please don't cry, all right? I'm not a visual designer, these are not amazing, but they'll get the point across, so hopefully that's okay. I guess what I wanted to talk a little bit about here was the fact that the universe is actually defined by a couple of different things, one of which is dimensionality, which is a big nerdy way of saying space and time. So we've got 3 physical dimensions, basically the X, Y, Z planes, right? So length, breadth, and height. We also have time, that's the 4th dimension. If you subscribe to superstring theory, big fan of Stephen Hawking, you'll know that there's actually more like 10 universes, or rather dimensions, and that is basically all sort of stems around the concept of the multiverse. So if you're a DC Comics fan, you'll probably be right in on that as well. But the other side of the coin is around the laws of physics. So this is all about the actual natural laws that govern our universe. There's a few. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail because, as I mentioned in the notes sort of describing this topic, I've got like year 10 physics at best. So there's no way that I can give you a breakdown of like electrostatic laws and thermodynamic laws. The laws of motion I think most of us kind of get. Things like gravity and sort of momentum and stuff like that. But basically we've got all of these laws that were essentially invented by very, very smart physicists. People like Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. There's a gentleman by the name of, I'm going to forget this, Charles Augustin de Coulomb as well, who invented one as well, probably not quite as famous as people like Newton and Einstein. But these guys were super smart, and they have developed not theories, though they started that way, but laws. That means that these things, these models of the universe, are not only reliable and accurate, but they predict future outcomes. That's pretty amazing. So these are the things that govern how our universe works, specifically from a physical space point of view, but we'll also talk a little bit about how digital might be playing into that as well. I guess what I'm really interested in here is the fact that I have started out in digital. So I very much have that digital and service design background, so service design being a little bit more physical. But recently I started getting into spatial design. I was really keen on exploring the concept of interior architecture and kind of what it meant to design a space. How do we use the UCD practice or approach to actually build out the interior design or the interior architecture of a room or an exhibition space or a branch of, say, a bank. And it's actually quite interesting because the spatial design paradigm or approach is very similar, if not the same, at a high level to what we do in digital. But there are some nuances, and we'll go into them in a second. I don't want to get to the good stuff just yet. I've got to kind of draw you in a little bit. So if we have a look at, I guess, what defines an experience, based on those laws of physics and sort of the dimensionality of the universe, really what we've got is, we all start with truth, right? And the laws of physics, being these laws and predictable outcomes, are truths. We know these as fact. Some of us may, in fact, interpret them slightly differently. There are people who are very vocal who still believe that the world is flat. However, that's their interpretation, that's their perspective, their frame of reference, their beliefs being overlaid over those truths. So that then creates their reality. Your reality, my reality, a little bit different. The way that we're all interpreting what I'm talking about now, you know, some of you might be coming at it as, you know, quite cynical and, you know, hey, prove it to me. I'm not going to just believe you just yet. It's not truth yet. So even though we're talking about kind of experiencing the same event, each one of us is going to overlay perspective on that and experience it slightly differently. So that creates a different reality for each of us. When you look at reality and then overlay sensory input, so this is our, not just our perspective, but our perception. That's when things get a little bit interesting. So, as an example, someone who is, say, we had someone dialing in to tonight. So they wouldn't be getting the visuals, but they would get the audio track. We might also have someone who, hi to the people playing at home, there's a video recording, by the way. If there's someone watching this video right now, or rather in the future, they'll see the visual and they'll hear me talking, but they won't get the vibe of the camaraderie in the room, they won't feel the air conditioning, they won't have a beer in their hand and necessarily sort of feel that, you know, cool amber liquid and the delicious nature of a beer. So, you know, sorry to those of you who are watching, but yeah, that's one of the benefits of being here, I guess. But all of those individuals, given the fact that those sensory inputs are different, will have different experiences of this event, right? So bear with me. It's probably important at this point then to understand how that impacts physical space versus digital space. But first things first, what the hell is physical space? How do we define that? And that's probably a really good place to start. So what I wanted to just sort of give you a bit of a background in at the moment is kind of what I define physical space to be. I've had a look, I've done the whole Google, you know, etymology of words, and yes, physical stems from, as you would expect, the Latin, right? Physica. And physica really means relating to nature. It generally refers to things that are real, authentic, actual. What are some of the other words? We've got tangible and concrete. But that doesn't really cover the breadth of what physical really is. I mean, you can't touch, hold air, so it's not really tangible, is it? You can kind of feel the effects of it, you can see the effects of it. It's not concrete. So there's definitely physical entities that don't really, it's not adequately described by those words. So I've kind of looked a little bit at shaping that definition. And what I think physical is something that's governed by the universe's dimensions. So it has space, it has time, and the laws of physics, so our world's truths. Does that kind of sound reasonable? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, go with me on this. But what the hell is digital? Oh, this is gonna, I'm losing the tech, sorry. I know. Yeah. Oh! No! See, this is, no, there we go. See, this is, I can keep going because this is not just a digital thing, right? Okay, back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I'll keep going. So, digital, can everyone hear me?
No, you need to.
Hey, all right, thanks. So digital, is it governed by the universe's laws and dimensionality? Anyone got a thought on that? Does digital have space and time?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. What about the laws of physics? Yeah? How so? Things like motion, You can see things, yeah?
Probably don't understand the electronics behind it.
Well, this is excellent. Yeah, so this is a really interesting thing. When you think of digital as a sort of entity, we very much describe, basically it's kind of lights on a screen. That's digital. And what we forget sometimes is that actually that's housed in a physical entity, a physical device, by a physical person, in a physical environment, and that kind of gives you the context, right? And this is what we as user experience practitioners, as developers, as visual designers, as all the different sort of parts of the ecosystem that produce digital assets, this is what we need to be really cognizant of. I'm going to keep going. Hey! Thank you, Joe. So I guess, to me, digital, potentially, to your point, there are definitely the physical aspects of the things that house digital. But really the digital stuff that you see on screen, it doesn't necessarily have all of the dimensions that we would normally expect from the physical world. For example, if you see a box, if you see this image on screen right now, is it 2D or 3D? 2D, correct. So it may look 3D, that is a trick of the eye. It is not sticking out from the screen. It is in fact 2D. So 3D representations of physical space are represented in 2 dimensions. So this is not 3D, and therefore doesn't actually have all of the dimensions that would be associated with traditional physical space. So before I lose you, because this is starting to sort of blow my mind a little bit, digital really is represented by ones and zeros, you know, at the kind of the core of where digital stemmed from. And that's actually apparently where possibly the word digital came from. Digital, again, Latin, came from the word digitus, which means finger or toe. And there's kind of ideas as to what that actually means. How did they get finger or toe to mean digital? We think, or there's hypotheses, that actually that represents the ones and zeros. So the way of counting back in the day, you know, when calculators went around, maybe even before the abacus, you know, it was a concept of how people might have counted. On, off, correct. So have you seen this presentation before? No, okay, perfect. Perfect. No, that's great. That's great. So yes, quite rightly, toggle on and off, right? So it's sort of, you've got yes, no, right? So that is what we kind of expect might be the rationale behind the word digital. But it's also the storage of and rapid representation of data, digital, with a combination of electricity and magnets. So to the point of the gentleman in front, yes, there's definitely physical principles that underpin digital. So digital, interestingly enough, obviously behaves quite differently to physical space. One example of that is in potentially how we take a journey from point A to point B. So physical space, I can move from here to here. That takes me some time, right? And I can be in this place at this point in time. Now I'm in a different place at a different point in time. I can't be in 2 places really at once unless you kind of are really specific about how big I am and how many points on the Earth's surface I'm taking up. Please don't do that. But digital is very different because we essentially are using stargates, kind of mechanisms that allow us to zoom from place to place in almost an instant, the blink of an eye, to move between information. I can be on a banking website and within 1 click of a link be on a telecommunication website. It's pretty amazing. In fact, you can be in 3 different places at once. You can be in several different places at once in digital. A feat not yet mastered by physical space. So there's some pretty amazing things that we can do in digital, right? Yeah, we are like Superman, that's right. So back to the multiverse. It's good. So underpinning all of this digital space travel is this concept of the fact that we've got, you know, electromagnetic principles underpinning how servers work and all of that kind of jazz. But ultimately, all of that digital representation of data is used by a physical person in a physical space, in a physical environment with a physical device. There's all this physical that sort of fits around it and actually facilitates the use of that digital. So when you design a website, actually, that's kind of part of the equation. So I've realized I've gotten like super nerdy, and I'm gonna maybe get into a little bit more of the sensory stuff. So I've just realized that. You missed my cool like diagrams. So looking at sensors, so you know how we mentioned before about the interpretation of the sensory inputs that we have around us influencing the way that we experience things. That's what this is all about. So what I tried to do was kind of break down the different sensory inputs that someone might have, and yes, we've got the typical senses, taste, smell, touch, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But I've gone kind of a step further to understand specifically what are the characteristics of each of those, and how can we break those down and almost put them across this Venn diagram of physical on one side and digital on the other. Yeah? And what I found was that the digital space actually has no sensory inputs that are unique to digital. So there are a lot of sensory inputs that are used by digital, but they are in that middle space where they are actually also part of the physical environment. So this is where we kind of start to evolve with the fact that maybe digital doesn't really exist. Actually, it's digital, which is a really wanky way of saying it is actually digital, but just make sure you think about physical space when you're doing it. So physical space, taste, yes, definitely physical. Smell, definitely physical. Right. Sound, definitely physical. Yeah. So we've got there things like the tone. So the actual sound that you hear. We've got the duration of that sound. They're both things that are encompassed by physical space and online. So digital, you can have tone and you can have the duration of sound played through an online application, website, whatever. But the one thing around sound that doesn't really go very well on digital is the position of origin. So if you close your eyes, everyone close your eyes, come on. Audience participation. I've got a laser pointer, I can point you out. Ready? Okay. I'm going to say something, obviously I'm at the mic right now. I want you to point to me when you think you know where I am. All right guys, where am I? Okay, now open your eyes. Right? Ben Pekatich, you got a problem. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so it's even a bit fudgy in physical space. Am I hearing you? All right, so you kind of got that right though. So that's something that you wouldn't necessarily get in digital. You'd hear not where the position of origin of that sound was, but where it's coming from the digital device. So again, you kind of lose that context. Digital. So we've covered off the sound component. We've got sight as well. So obviously there's quite a lot of things that we can do with sight. In fact, there's not a lot that is sort of not shared between the two. We've got the size and shape and pattern and all of the things that visual designers will be able to tell you the multitude of things that factor into sight. And yes, they play out in both physical space and in digital. But touch is an interesting one, and I think Katya will probably touch on a little bit of this in her wearables bit as well. So it's a nice little segue. Touch is a really interesting one because we are sort of getting into the point now where touch is relevant to digital. Right? So specifically, if you look at things like wearables, and even the haptic response of your keyboard when you are typing is a physical response. But the interesting thing about that is that with the haptics, so the way that, say, your Apple Watch, it gives you a bit of pressure, a little bit of a love tap when you've got a notification, that is absolutely touch in kind of digital form-ish. But there's a lot that we lose out on that are only available in physical space. Texture, temperature, so far. What else have we got? There's loads. Density, weight, materiality. So if you feel jeans versus cotton versus silk, they're all things that are very much physical space design tools. And they definitely factor into that spatial design, structural design, industrial design sort of work that we get to do. So, what does that actually mean for digital? Digital, and I'm going to revert to saying digital because it's just so much easier, has actually done a hell of a lot for us. And the reason being that the digital elements, the UI, you know, all of that kind of technological stuff that sort of underpins a lot of the physical stuff that we have, actually has a dramatic effect on how we live as humans. So as an example, we now have fridges that will do your online shopping. We have cameras that while you're out at the grocery store, you can check to see if the milk's running low. It's pretty amazing. We've got logistics and retail have been revolutionized by the concept of just-in-time delivery. So warehousing costs have gone down, which means that ultimately the cost to the consumer has also gone down. So there's some pretty dramatic changes around how technology impacts various industries, but always within the confines of a sort of a physical industry, a physical space. So it's kind of augmenting physical space or transcending the barriers of physical space. We are able to communicate with people 10,000 miles away in real time. You know, I have spoken to my parents on Skype at, you know, what is 3 in the morning for them. I did apologise, but hey, that's all right, we learnt. And that was pretty amazing. So while I was in London, I could have conversations with them to keep in touch, which is pretty incredible. This is all so new and so wonderful. It's helping us build relationships, and it's helping us to grow communities. We've got examples where, you know, Marty McFly would be super proud of cars that drive themselves, and hoverboards that, you know, it's a thing, it's getting there. We've got banking that you can get money out from an ATM with your fingerprint. Pretty amazing. And there are doctors in London who can take out your appendix in Australia using buttons, a high-res monitor and joystick, right? So it's not quite, you know, on Medicare yet, but the technology is there. But at the same time, that same technology, for better or worse, is used in drones for neutralising threats overseas, which, you know, there's positives. We're potentially saving lives, but at the same time, the flip side of that is that technology can also be used in the reverse. So it kind of has the potential to take the humanism out of conflict, and whether or not you subscribe to the positives or negatives of drones in the military, it's a pretty dramatic change from what we had before. Pilot risk is dramatically reduced as well, so there's definitely positives. So that's kind of digital. But what is the power of digital? It has the power to make our world bigger and smaller at the same time. Pretty amazing. And by that I mean that we have grown the boundaries of our universe, our known universe, through space travel. We have the ability now to potentially give, you know, lots and lots of money and get a flight on a rocket if you really wanted to. I would suggest buying a house, but, you know, that's just me. We've got the ability now to internationally travel. We have made the world so small, so easy to get around, and so accessible, so cost effective, so efficient. Those things have changed dramatically because of technology. We are able to get access to seemingly infinite data online. And there's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of stuff that we kind of can't even perceive because it's just too much. But at the same time, there's instant news through social media, through a variety of different channels now. In fact, when I've got a house in Brisbane, and in the Brisbane floods of 2011, I sort of found out that was all happening while I was in Sydney at work. And the way that I found out that my house had been affected was through YouTube. someone had posted a video of my street and panned across, and I saw a pool in my front yard. And that's when I knew, right, time to go home, hopped a plane, and busted a move straight over there. But that's stuff that I wasn't getting through traditional channels. So technology is pretty incredible. And it has the power to dramatically change lives. We also have relationships that can be made or broken by technology. So you post a status and you build relationships, or potentially you tear them down. So there's a lot of power in that communication. And for people who have access needs, it is a really powerful tool as well. So again, it opens their universe. It gives them access to things that in the physical space may be more challenging, but only if we support it. So I cannot stress this enough, but we need to put so much more of a focus on making inclusive design so much more integral in what we do. Because it is for this reason that people with access needs are maybe not able to access information and tools in the same way that people without access needs are. But really, we've got the power to change that. We've got the technology, so why aren't we using it? So that's one of the things that I want you to take away, is the fact that broadening our horizons in terms of our audiences and making sure that we support access needs is a great way of taking the technology that exists now and really optimizing for it. So making sure that we are doing our very best to make these things available to everyone. And why is that? Well, and this is the last slide, so we've got a little bit of time for questions if anyone wants them later. We, humans, are designed to change. We adapt based on stimulus. So the things that happen around us are likely to change our frame of reference, our expectations, our needs, our contexts, what we believe, how important things are, all of that. And that has the power to change us as humans. But the really interesting thing about that is once those expectations and needs and contexts are changed, so too does the problem space. And so we design. We as humans design. But when we design, what happens? We then change, again, the way that we interact with things. We change the interaction paradigms and the way that people perceive information. And therefore, we change human evolution, which is pretty massive, right? It's quite interesting because I guess one of the, I think a really nice example of this, maybe a very small example, is the fact that my mum's cousin got in touch with me on Facebook, wanted to be my friend, and bless her little heart. I didn't really know how to tell a distant relative that I didn't particularly want the, photos of me doing Jaeger shots in a bar and snogging the Swedish backpacker down the road. Probably wasn't really for her, right? And just to be clear, that didn't actually happen. That's sort of an anecdote that I sort of finessed a little bit so you don't really know too much about me. So, but that etiquette, right, that was developed out of digital. That didn't exist before. I would have been quite happy to tell my relationship status to friends and family in incremental fashion as the concentric circles of my friends and family got sort of less and less important, really, I guess. You start with the most important people to you, tell them the information, and you kind of trickle out from there. That's traditionally how it's worked. But now, you've got to, it's not official until it's on Facebook, right? So once you're not single, you update your status, and everyone, including the acquaintance you met, from a random job 15 months ago, knows that you're now off the market. But I don't know, it just seems like that's such an unusual way when you look at it like that. But that's a thing now. So there's this digital etiquette that's evolved out of the fact that we are using technology that has been built for us in new ways. It's shaping our communities. It's shaping our social norms. And I guess what I wanted to kind of get across with this concept of physical and digital is that really what we're doing when we design is we're not just shaping a website. We're not just building a tool. We're not just building a flow of information. Actually, what we're doing is changing the way that people interact with your service. Potentially that means if you're, say, using best practice or sort of competitive in line with competitive industry, then you're perpetuating behaviours. If you are an innovator, or if you're deliberately trying to disrupt, then you are dramatically changing things for people. I guess if we're a little bit maybe more cognizant of how our specific design elements affect the way that people perceive every other digital offering out there, I mean, it's quite an interesting problem that we're really trying to solve, isn't it? It's not just about creating a single digital entity. What we're doing is dramatically changing the way that people interact with digital more generally, whether it be the interface or the device or the wearable and the physical space and all of that kind of stuff. And an example of that, just to sort of sum up, I guess, is if you have ever used a west-facing ATM, yeah, maybe you don't recognise it as a west-facing one, but you probably do about halfway through the afternoon, when you've got a, can I see? The light hits it, right? So this is an example of where physical and digital coming together. The digital interface has probably been designed isolated from that particular spot as a general ATM interface. But actually, because it's in that spot, with that sun at that point in time, the individual has significant trouble using that. So the usability of it is very much affected by physical space and time. That's it. So thank you.
Do a bit of running around. So we start over here and start sweeping and see if anyone's got a question for Kim. And it was a very actually it's quite like a tiny little simple idea, but it took a good half hour to get your head around it.
Sorry about
and really communicate it well. No, it's not criticism. So, does anyone have a question about this new merging of you would have to be right at the very end, wouldn't you? But this merging of digital and physical.
So, Kim, so I'm interested when you talk about access issues and things like that and the way that affects aspects of society. I'm really interested in your thoughts on how that affects those people's lives, really, and what could be done there.
About access, you mean accessibility? About
accessibility, but I mean not just in a site perspective, but also the building perspective you're talking about, because I think that's a good one.
Nice. I'm really glad you asked that, actually. Access needs, obviously, are not just site. I mean, that's probably the traditional one that we kind of think about in digital, mostly because that's probably the most commonly used sense when we're looking at our audiences. However, access needs are cognitive, physical, sensory, emotional. There's actually quite a lot of different types of access needs that exist. And in fact, all of us are on the spectrums of every one of those. Not all of us have perfect 20/20 vision. If I take these bad boys off, I have no idea who you all are. But I have an aid that helps me out, right? In some cases, there are access needs that there's just not an aid that is able to support that, or there's an aid that they have, for example, a screen reader if you're looking at the site, or captioning if you've got a hearing impairment. So there are technological tools that can be used to improve the way that they perceive that information. That's very much a digital thing. Physical space, absolutely same issue. So with physical space, there's better governance and more specific requirements around what access needs a physical space needs to have, mostly in commercial and public. Residential is not quite so much governed, but it's very much I think what physical space does really well is there are quite a lot of very measurable, tangible requirements, like the gradient on a ramp. There is actually a rule around how that gradient needs to work, what the maximum gradient is in terms of sort of the level of sort of steepness. Big one? There you go. Perfect. And a lot of people actually know what that is. But in digital, maybe it's a little bit harder. We've got WCAG guidelines, phenomenal, but everywhere that I've ever worked, people have had a little bit of trouble kind of understanding what that actually means to them, how to interpret those. And because the technology is so evolving, it is actually really hard to figure out the best way to do something. So yes, I think physical space, it's probably very much more governed and more supported, but we can get there with digital, I think. So hopefully, you know, if all of us kind of band together and get our accessibility on, we can crack through that. Does that answer your question, Dean?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you, Kim.